First thing I want to do is think about values as they relate to color. So if I start with the red pear, for example, the darkest value on that red pear is over here on the right because my light source is coming in out the window, and I've got my middle red values equal that are roughly adjacent to that middle gray value, and moving darker into that darkest dark over on the right hand side. So again, I'm going to work dark to light, lean to fat. So working with a little bit of medium and Gamsol, again just trying to get the paint where I can move it around but not super high oil content, working fat over lean. So with the colors available to me, I'm going to work with a larger brush to start with. So the red of the pear, if I'm thinking about the color and the intensity of the color, it is not that pure red that I see that I have on my palette as one of my primaries. It really is a couple of steps over towards red violet. So I'm going to start a bit of Gamsol, a little bit of medium. So I'm going to start here. My darkest value, I'm going to start with that, what would be equivalent to a blue violet. That darkest dark right along the right edge of the pear. And the value should be about the same as the value that I have already assigned in my grisaille painting. Then as I move across, I'm going to get a little bit lighter value, and I want it to be equal in value to that I already have down. I think that's a bit light. So I'm just modifying that darkest dark a little bit. That's a little better. So it's really kind of matching, figuring out how to match the values that you already have down. Again, working really thin, not trying to over blend at this point. I think I should get a little darker as it goes down to the bottom edge of that pear. And then the next shift is going to be right along this shadow line from my darkest value to slightly darker than that middle value. I'm going to lighten up a little bit, not quite to my middle gray. And I'm not trying to blend here, but I am going to drag a little bit of one value into the other. So I start to get kind of a roughly blended area, but I'm not, at this point, again, I'm not trying to overblend. What can happen when you overblend, when you're sitting right on top of your painting, is you see it as being perfectly blended and perfectly rendered, and then when you step away from it, I've got a little bit of a shadow over on this side, when you step away from it, it kind of loses any strength of value. So if you overblend those values too early in the painting, then that value pattern disappears and it gets really soft, and then when you move away from it, it just disappears from in front of you. All right, so now as I move over into the light, not only does the value come up a little bit to that middle value, but that color gets a little more intensified. So I'm going to step over towards my red and I may need to go over a little bit more than this. I've made one step over, but I want that color to start to become a little more intense as I move across that transition from my darker core shadow into my midtone. So I'm going to adjust that value up again to get to that middle value. And the great thing about painting on this gray tone for your grisaille is that if you have a palette that the value of the palette itself is roughly the same as what you're painting on, then you know that what the paint looks like here is going to read the same way on your painting. That's really the value, in my opinion, of using a grisaille underpainting. So checking those values, but that color gets more intense and more saturated as it comes across this middle section. And I'll get that transition into my light area. Then as it comes around on the light side of the pear, I really see an intensifying of my color. So I'm going to step over again, one step. But it's still that, oops, sorry, pretty much that middle value. It's just more intense because that light is hitting directly, more directly on that side of the pear, of the form of the pear. And then that more intense color kind of wraps around behind the stem. And then it comes across in front of that dimple where the stem is. I need to go back to my slightly darker, got a little bit of a darker shadow just here before it transitions into that light area. Then my light up here, it's much brighter, much higher key right up here, and then it kind of fades into this middle tone as it comes down. And it's a little cooler where the light is coming in, because that's exterior light. You're going to see some reflection of sky and sort of a little grayer tone. So I'm going to go back to my light value, step it back over to my blue-violet a little bit. Clean my brush. So when you go from your shadows to your halftones, make sure that you're working with a brush that's cleaner, because if you've got dark paint in your brush, it's going to affect the light as it goes down on the canvas. So I'm just going to lay that light in there. And then blend it into that dark down on the bottom, because it's really much more subtle. And it's much sharper edge transition up at the top. And then the light up here is a little more intense. So I'm going to edge over, maybe one step over into that red-orange. And sort of blend those values a little bit. And then I've got a really kind of very cool light back behind that stem, that if I were using a full palette, I would use a blue. Then this background color here, I want to key in just a little bit of that background color. So it is a neutral, so I'll need to mix a little bit of all of my color, being careful with that red, remembering that it's super intense. I didn't mix my neutrals on my palette before. So I want something that is going to be kind of needs to be a little grayer. So you can actually, you know, take it and hold it up and check your color mixes. White, not that much. So it's going to be a middle value. I need a little more yellow. So when I add white to it, I can see if I've made any incorrect mixes. So I'm going to go with that for right now. Now when I look at the transition of color and light across here, it doesn't change all that much, but when it gets right next to the pear, this surface is darker and less intense than the pear. So the value here doesn't make a dramatic shift, but you do need to be aware of the difference in value and intensity of the pear and the wall behind it. So I'm going to add a little more black to part of that mixture to kind of cool that down. So it's going to be cooler because it's behind the pear. A little bit of Gamsol, a little bit of medium, and pick up some of that darker, cooler, still in that middle value range. And I want to find the edge of the pear, and I think that needs to come step down in value just a smidge and cool off a little bit. So I'm going to add a little more black to it. That's better. So I just changed it just slightly, and then as I bring my background color out, I'm going to let it drift a little into slightly lighter. So I don't have a big dramatic shift between here and here, but when it gets right up next to the pear, that color does get a little deeper. I think I need a little more yellow in my background color as it comes out this way. Then when I bring that same color and value behind the pear on the opposite side, it's going to have the appearance of being much lighter than the pear. So I want to find the edge of the pear with the edge of my brush. So when unless there's a dramatic shadow behind the pear, which there isn't, I want to make sure that my background color and value, even though I've shifted it into a slightly cooler, slightly darker mix of the same color right on the light side of the pear, that it still reads as the same surface. So then I'll come back. I think I need to intensify again on the light side of that pear. I'm going to step over to my red and even keep the value the same, but intensify the chroma. Against that cooler and slightly darker. Then a little bit of that lighter chroma sneaks over on the side of that highlight. And I think I need to blend a little bit more here. But again, not over blending. There. Then I'll do the same thing working into the greens of the pear, but really at this point, at this stage, I'm really using the map of the grisaille underpainting. Does that make sense? So this stage of the painting goes pretty quickly. Then as your next step will be refining this even further. So working those transitions more subtly, really looking carefully at those color shifts and the temperature shifts within the painting. So for example, here in the dark side of the pear, there's a little bit of reflected light. But it's not just a lighter value of this color that's here, it's taking on a little bit of the yellow that I see bouncing off the side of that yellow-green pear. So my reflected light will still be within a dark, but just in that light area, I'm going to have a reflected light that is still a dark value. Remember, reflected light is not a bright light. It's still a dark value, but it's going to read, ooh, that's too light. It's going to read more of that yellow green color that right now doesn't make a tremendous amount of sense, but as soon as I get my other pear painted yellow green, then that's going to make sense, right? So you've got to think about that, and that's a great thing about this palette, is everything is really integrated, right? You're working out of that same family of colors throughout the whole painting, so you get a really harmonious finished product. Does not mean that this is the way you should paint forever and ever and ever, because I got to get some like bright yellow in here, and I got to get some blue. But that you can come up and have a look at this, at how when I say I'm not blending, I'm really not blending a whole lot, working slowly and working very lean through this painting. Okay? Cool.